Hector, thank you. First of all, thank you for joining. You've been a life of service. It seems to me that you have the heart of a servant, and it must be in the DNA of your family because you have your son Hector Jr. that is also followed in your steps in the Meriden Police Department. You have your son Dr. Miguel Cardona, who was the past Secretary of Education. And if I'm not mistaken, is your daughter also involved? Is she a social worker?
She was working in Meriden with the school system,
right.
As a social worker. And, well, no, I love Meriden. I came here, like you said, when I was 7 years old, and Meriden gave me everything I have today. I owe a lot to the city, and I want to. And I told my children the same thing: give back to the city. Give back to Meriden. If you get a profession or whatever. Stay in Meriden, and Hector, my son, was offered jobs, in other places. He shows Meriden because he likes Meriden too. And my son, the school teacher, Miguel, he was offered jobs as a teacher outside of Meriden. We're part of this city, and like I tell a lot of the people, we want to be part of the solution. But I'd love to see Meriden progress, and I want to be part of that, in my family. I'd like to be part of that. So I owe a lot to the city, and like I say, that's one of the reasons I became a police officer, to help the people, and that was the best part of my job, working with people. Like every time someone had a problem, I would put myself in their shoes, and how would I want to handle it, But like one night, a while back, this lady calls the house. She called me crying. Her daughter, 13-year-old daughter, she never got home from school. Went home with her friends or whatever, and never got home. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I mean, what can I say, So I got dressed and I went to the house, to make her feel better, and we were ready to make a report because she was 13 years old. But luckily, as I was there, she shows up. She lost track of time. She went with her friends to the mall, and they met other friends, and so so when she saw her daughter, I mean, she thought I was her savior.
Weren't you also assigned to the Mills Memorial Complex when it was kind of a scary place?
Yes, when there were gangs and a lot of drug dealings, and I had an office there, and they respected me, and I know who the players were, but I would tell them, say, whatever you do, if you do things in front of me, it's there's consequences. But I've never had a problem with it. They respected me, and which is important. If they were congregating, I would tell them once, don't hang around here. Keep walking. Yeah. And they would. This is an older man and not gang related. Right. And he couldn't find a job. He couldn't find a job because with his past record,
Right.
So, and he was trying to do good. He says, I'm tired of all the bad things I did. I want to try to live a normal life with my family and everything. But he can't get a job. I went and I knew this guy from Millennium, one of the factories here. I went up to him personally and I says, hey, there's a guy that I'll vouch for. And I knew he was a nice guy. Yeah. He just had, fell in wrong bad times, And I says, is there, if you hire him, I'll be responsible for him. Any problems you have that he gives you, you let me know. And,
wow.
And he hired him because of that. And he was one of the best workers. Never had a problem. Yeah. And so he straightened out. He had his family. He had more children, and that was the end of that. I also had a show on the radio. It was 4 hours on Saturdays, and it was covered. It covered the center of the state, and I had people calling from Waterbury, Hartford, even New Haven. Then I had through the internet. Some people call me from Puerto Rico, Colombia, Illinois, and requesting old music. That's what I specialize in, the oldies, Spanish music, and I had a lot of old music, and they would request a song, and I would have it, and they were all thrilled. I haven't heard this song since, my parents used to listen to that. But yeah, it makes me feel good seeing that people are happy, try to make people happy. In 1973, we started the choir in St. Rose, the Spanish music.
Right.
And then from there, I mean, we were there almost 20 years. And then we started the Wallingford Choir. We started the one in Middletown. We went to different parishes trying to, find musicians from there. And we played for about a month, and then now you take over.
But if you would basically think of, what do you think maybe are your proudest accomplishments, and what do you think are the secret is that's differentiated you from a lot of people, for example, that go into law enforcement or that grow up in bilingual communities? What do you think has been the key to your success that you could advise or counsel, recommend to other people following in your shoes?
Well, I learned from people. As people look at me as a police officer, like I'm going to solve, I'm going to solve their problems. A lot of times I could, and depending on, but I learned from them. You learn from other people's problems, how to better yourself. I love people. Everybody, we're all here for the same reasons. Try to better ourselves, and if I could help someone, law enforcement, police work is not a 9-to-5 job.
No, it's not.
And if you take it for that reason, it's the wrong reason. You want to be there to help people. Like one of the things, like we went to 9/11. We went there. A couple times. A group of us, and including my son. He came with us, and we saw. I mean, this is nothing compared to what the devastation that we saw there, and and we never thought that would happen in the United States, but we survived. We pulled through, and we're back on our feet. Another thing too, like Sandy Hook, I was there for a week.
I didn't know that.
I went there when that happened. There were a couple of guys from the department. We went down there. I was one of them. We were there for a week, helping them with traffic, with whatever. Because they had their hands tied. So many, funerals. And, I was there for a week. It shows how when things happen, in a negative way. I mean, you could tell where everybody bonds together,
right.
and say like 9/11, you see all the people, every time they saw a cruiser go by, or they would clap, and they had
right.
signs, "Thank you,"
right.
And things like that. I never thought, I always thought New Yorkers were like mean and
yeah.
rough,
Right.
That was wrong.
They were so grateful, yeah.
Yeah, very grateful.
Yeah.
And people would come with pots of food they would cook.
Right.
McDonald's, they had an 18-wheeler dropping off burgers and whatever
kidding.
to all the people working. So, yeah, things like that. There's this elderly lady who I knew. She would call me. She'd put a pot of coffee, and we would sit, have coffee, and her grandson would be seeing that and say, "Wow, I want to be like him." And he became a police officer.
Well, see, isn't that something though?
And you know who he's our chief today.
Chief Rosado. I did not know that.
His grandmother used to, we used to have coffee and everything. Yeah. And I used to do a lot of bus safety in schools and everything, and a lot of kids, they see that, they like the uniform, they see that, and a lot of them, not just me, but I mean any other officer could, hit that trigger where that child may become a police officer or
right.
what have you.
So you were probably his first mentor then.
I'm sure. Yeah, well, he knew a lot of people too. His family knew a lot of people, but yeah, you never know.
That's up there.
We had our first Puerto Rican police officer, Alberto Piccirillo.
Right.
Have you heard that name?
Oh, yes.
He was married to a Polish lady.
Right.
Good people. And when he was a supervisor, he would have his wife, like for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
He would have he would walk home because he lived on Oak Street over
Right.
here, and he would bring plates of food for all the prisoners.
Oh, is that
People that
something?
were locked up on Thanksgiving Day, he would feed them, you know. And
Thank you, Irene, Masse, film an interview with you. So you were chosen to represent the law/government. You were chosen to best represent what basically public sector work, career, profession that can often be dominated by men. You know, have a career in banking, and then you were the town clerk.
I love people and I love paperwork. Someone strange comes into City Hall. He always comes to the city clerk's office first.
Yes.
And I know, I just have to share this one time, this older gentleman came in and he says, I'm trying to get to the housing department and I can't find, and I just came around the corner, I just followed me. And I went into the housing department, got up to help him. I went, my last meeting was with the town clerk,
Uh-huh.
New England town clerk.
Okay.
You know, not just New England, and then I belong to the master minister, you know,
Right.
the entire U.S. Well, they had called me up, you know, to give me acknowledgement. The president says to me, Irene, turn around. The whole place is standing up for you. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, isn't that so?
I mean, that's still to this day. Recognition meant a lot to me because I didn't expect it, I guess. I was just doing my job, and like I said, I loved what I was doing. I loved being a town clerk.
Yeah.
I would have stayed on. The only reason why I didn't was because I was elected. Because if I stayed on and I was elected again, it would have been for a 4-year term. And I was old by then, and I thought, if I die before my term comes, paper, city clerk, we need a special election. That meant money spent.
The heart of a servant. Well, that's why you're the best of the best. To see a woman in a profession that's acknowledged for her profession, and then, you know, you first you did banking, you were in the Board of Education, you were the city clerk, right, and then, you know, Justice of the Peace. I mean, you just got the heart of a servant. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us. And so we've asked you here to talk about Walter Hubbard because he was chosen from the Philanthropy category to best represent the philanthropic spirit of Meriden. I know you're going to talk about Walter Hubbard, and nobody can do it better. If you would like to talk about Walter Hubbard, we'd be so pleased to hear.
Sure. You know, his life is a fascinating one. You know, he was born September 23rd, 1828. He was born in Middletown. His family was military turned agriculture. He didn't want the farming life, so he ended up becoming secondary to a merchant in Middletown. And then once he made enough capital, he came to Meriden. He opened up his own dry goods store here. One of his customers was a gentleman named Levi Bradley, who was from Cheshire. And when he came in, hey, you should meet my daughter. And that's how Hubbard met Abby Bradley, who ultimately became his wife. Unfortunately, after they got married, she died 6 months later, the day before her 20th birthday. And it's just such a tragic story already in his lifetime. He was 24, she was 19. I mean, imagine that. I mean, 24 years old, you just lost your wife. You're just, in the startup of a business. But during that time, her brother, Nathaniel Bradley, was in the startup of Bradley and Hubbard, which would eventually become Bradley and Hubbard. And Walter had charisma, and Nathaniel had the know-how. So it was very early on. They said, Walter, you're going to be the president, and Nathaniel was going to be the treasurer, but also kind of the foreman. He knew how the ins and outs of business.
The operations.
The operations, correct.
Right.
And so that was that's where the money came from. And this predates the Civil War, so they already had their foot in the door with clocks and just metalware. But when the Civil War came, it changed a little bit. You know, they were actually doing stuff for the government with buttons and so on. So they were able to change with the time, and that actually ultimately led them to becoming one of the greatest, one of the biggest metalware companies in the. So he needed another outlet, you know. And it's one thing about Hubbard, you know, he lost his wife so early on. He wasn't the type of guy, you know, being such high stature in the company or even in Meriden, you know, he wasn't one to go back out, you know, and find a replacement wife. So about 1870-ish, I guess you can say, he had gotten so bored with the business. And then the big thing was in 1869, he started acquiring land. Now, he had no descendants. I mean, he was a family man in a lot of sense because he always was in contact with his brothers. In fact, when one of his brothers died, you know, he actually adopted his niece. And he called her his daughter, even though it was his niece. And you know, she actually lived with him. She lived up here on right up the street here in Washington Place. When he had started collecting this land in 1869, he's got so disinterested in the business that he was advised to go for a trip around the world, and that changed everything. So in the early 1880s, he ended up going around the world. From San Francisco, he went over to China, and then he piggybacked around Asia and then into Europe. And it was then that he was actually making mental notes of some of the motifs and themes throughout some of the. He knew that he was building something here in Meriden. He knew with all this land that he was creating, and I plan on building this place. So he's already thinking, and that just goes to show what kind of person he was, as far as the betterment of the Meriden community. When he was in Scotland, he was in Craigellachie. They have the Craigellachie Bridge, and on either side are these two towers. So these four towers, and he fell in love with this, and that's where he gets the idea for the Castle Craig Tower. This whole European idea of life would be a beehive, and it's the sign of nature, the sign of life, and there's one beehive that's still up on the trail, and there's motifs of the beehive all still throughout the park. Like if you go behind the skate house, there's staircase going down, transcending down to the lower area, and at the base of the staircases you can see two beehives on the staircase. I mean, a lot of these things that people don't think about, but there's meaning behind all of this. But 1898 when was the grand opening, and then October 29th, 1900 is when they actually donated. He donated to the city. This guy, this guy had more money than just about anybody here in Meriden, but he led this kind of just life of of modest. There's only 8 pictures known of him today. Someone of that stature, you would think there'd be pictures.
Someone said, yeah, you got to go down and see Hubbard Park, and they've got the Daffodil Festival there, etc. A little history stuff, but the park is just breathtaking. And all the people that still come for all of the, the Festival of Lights, I mean, it just walking there, riding bikes, etc.
He didn't want automobiles in the park for a number of years. Even after he died, they didn't actually institute automobiles back into the park for a number of years, because he just didn't want, hey, if this is going to be your Sunday afternoon recreation time, you don't need to see this horseless carriage coming up and down. Yeah. But he actually tailored the road so that the actual cars would not come into the park. I mean, things like that no one really thinks about. I mean, but the forethought again.
Kevin, the 25th inductee in the Meriden Hall of Fame in its 50-year history that represents the business/commerce category. I'm struck by the parallels. Walter Hubbard, although he was named as the representative for the category Philanthropy for our 50th year exhibit, he, like you, started out in business, right? Became wildly successful and then became wildly philanthropic. So there's a trajectory here. They probably were as torn as I would be. Should it be in business/commerce or should it be in philanthropy? It's sort of like, almost like a hybrid, but it's almost like there's a pattern here. People that do well, then they continue to do well by doing good, which I think makes your history so compelling.
It's interesting how you compared me to Walter Hubbard in being someone in Meriden. A lot of people that have been successful in Meriden have left Meriden.
Yep.
And I've made my living in Meriden. I'm proud to be here. And I don't want to leave. I'm happy here.
Yeah.
I can go down the street no matter where I go. I know somebody and it works.
Yeah.
And I put my head down for many years and I worked hard. I worked 24 hours a day. I ran a towing business and I was out at all hours of the night. I raised my family, always took the time to get away, take trips with the family, with my wife. But now's the time when the kids are grown, the grandkids are around, and we're giving back to the community. Our goal was, along with my wife Patty, was to grow the company into a mission-based company and looking back at how we could give back to the community. And it's funny because I don't think I'm at the philanthropical point of my life yet, but I will be there at some point. A couple years ago, I went to the Dream Ride over in Farmington, which another one of our pillars is, helping our special friends, the special needs children, who now I have a granddaughter that falls into that category. And when you went there, you see these people coming from all over the world, and they bring them in to meet, and they call it the Dream Ride, and it's amazing. My granddaughter, she wanted something different last year, so she went in a garbage truck. She could have gone in a Ferrari, but she picked the garbage truck. I'm a son of an immigrant. Both my parents are from Ireland, and 40% of my family were born in London, and then the rest were born in America. 10 children, and we grew up in Glen Hill. And so a couple of years ago, one of our fundraisers was we raised money to bring kids in from Ireland from a group called Festina Lente, which is similar to CUNE, where it's a day program for young adults, and after they get out of high school. And they also have a equestrian farm there, and they grow plants and everything. So
This is in Ireland.
This is in Ireland,
Yeah.
yeah. And one of our family trips over, we actually went over and met with them,
Uh-huh.
and we ended up bringing 15 kids back.
Oh, wow.
And the total, I think 25 total, and I think it's a similar number this year that's coming. And they're coming this week.
For the Dream Ride.
I made another challenge last year, and to really get into the international part of the giving back is we want to take the kids from America over to Ireland. And so we have family there. My daughter married a kid from Ireland, so they live in Dublin. And so his family's there, and a lot of my cousins still live there. We go visit all the time. So we're going to bring back some special kids over to Ireland.
Wow.
And next June will be our first trip. And I said, if we started with one kid and one car, it would be a success.
Right.
And we're just going to grow it from there.
Right.
And we're going to do it on the grounds of Festina Lente and just have a beautiful trip. I enjoy giving back to others and helping, especially people that need the help.
Right.
And the children that don't have the opportunity, I serve on the board at Beat the Street. What Larry does, who's also a member of the Hall of Fame,
Right, I remember
is give back to the kids, and it's true volunteers that are there that really, and give them an opportunity that they wouldn't normally have. So as a kid, our whole family, delivered newspaper. And what happened was, as a kid, you're always intrigued by different things,
Yeah.
and I would deliver the newspaper to the garage, and I would just stop and watch the guys work. And I worked there for several years, probably from the age of 12, and I would ride my bicycle down there after I did my paper route. I'd go to the Bradley Diner and I'd get my water in the back. I'd get my own glass down and get my water, and and then I'd go over to Palumbo's and hang out and watch the guys work and clean up a little, and then eventually got into helping the guys work on the cars. And then I went to Wilcox, and I joined the automotive program, which I think the trade schools have been a tremendous, tremendous asset for myself.
Oh, that's nice.
As a kid, I walked to Wilcox, and I would walk through the back of Platte, and I'd have to jump over the river, so if the water was high, I was hoping not to get my feet wet before I went to school. And I remember my brothers and I going into the goldfish pond one time, but it's kind of a interesting thing.
Yeah.
Spent many times at the pool at Hubbard Park, then they built the pool at Platte, was on the Silver Fins swim team.
So you met and married your high school sweetheart, right?
Yeah, I
You
went-
met her at Wilcox?
Yeah, I actually met her at my brother's wedding at St. Stan's, and she had worked at McDonald's on the east side at the drive-thru.
Okay.
And I would come through with the tow truck and constantly to see her, and first I'd go in and order my burger, then I'd go out, 10 minutes later, come back and get my French fries, then I'd come back later and get a drink. That was because she ran the drive-thru.
It was also, speaking of Meriden, when you branded Teddy's,
Yes.
but everything being done.
Yeah, so when like I said, back in 2016, I took over the full operation, and we had grown, at the time, we had 6 of our own stations, and we had, I think, 8 or 9, somewhere in that area, of total stores. And we grew that to 19. I acquired another chain of stores. And we really pushed at that point to have our own brand, and a lot of the other distributors, gasoline distributors, were being bought out by majors, and we were in a nice spot, and I figured it'd be nice to have something that really shows something different. And we took on our dog, Teddy. My wife has always had a Teddy through her whole life as a dog. I think this is number 7. The whole brand was built around Teddy. And Tom and Lori Barton from Web Solutions actually started with the imaging, and Teddy has a cleft palate with a snaggletooth. And when we're doing the whole Teddy's image, it all surrounded that, had to look like Teddy and had to be Teddy, and everybody that knows her, she's always been around.
Yeah.
Our last dog was a collie that was named Teddy. Before that was a border collie named Teddy. And so from the time we got married, we took a dog from my wife's family dog at the time. She left her dog with her father and took the better one over with us. The one she picked out was a little crazy, but her father liked them, so then we took the other Teddy with us. And we moved. She grew up on Newton Street over by Muley's Market. I'd always come in and play Santa Claus at Christmas time for the kids, and I still do that at Beat the Street and enjoy doing that with the kids and having fun with them. So with the kids, and we had 4 kids, and we had 2 close together, then we had a 5-year gap, another 5-year gap, and it worked out well, and it spanned out a couple decades of the kids. So we and now that they're spread out, we have our 2 daughters actually live in our neighborhood. Then we moved to Mattabasset.
Okay.
And we bought a house in Mattabasset, and when we were there for years growing up, one of our neighbors was moving out, and my first daughter moved in. Then another one was moving out, and my next daughter moved in. And so and they each have 2 kids. And so the 4 grandkids are no more than 5 houses away from us. We also have 2 other children. Our second oldest, our oldest son, Sean, he's in the United States Army. He's a Black Hawk pilot.
Oh, wow.
He works in the special forces with the Night Stalkers. My wife and the girls are going, and my other son is flying in from Hawaii, where he lives. He's our youngest son. He is in Hawaii, and he's teaching physics at the Buddhist Academy in Honolulu.
Oh, wow.
And his wife now, just got married this year, is she's going for a astrophysics PhD at the University of Hawaii. So our family has also been entrenched in Meriden, and My oldest daughter, she works in insurance. She does a lot of cyber insurance for a lot of big companies.
I'm just sitting back here, wow. How about you guys? It's interesting. It's like when you're talking, like you're grinning from ear to ear. I mean, there's something so joyous, so contained.
Well, he was the superintendent of art in the Meriden schools, and I think there's only one person before that was.
Fame. This is all part of the exhibit that the Meriden Hall of Fame, in partnership with the Meriden Historical Society, is doing in October at the Meriden Historical Society's headquarters at 41 West Main. And the name of the exhibit is the 50th anniversary of the Meriden Hall of Fame. I'm looking at one of them right here. Here's Ellie, who was inducted into 2015 in the art category. So this is really a big deal that we have her here, as well as her daughter. I'm looking at one of them right here. Here's Ellie, who was inducted into 2015 in the art category. So this is really a big deal that we have her here, as well as her daughter. Anyway, and then also Joseph Pierce, who in the historic person category was a Chinese American who was basically sold into slavery in China by his father to a sea captain by the name of Captain Peck, brought to Connecticut to his farm on Chamberlain Highway, and he ended up enlisting in the Civil War. He is, as far as we know, maybe the only Chinese American ever enlisted in fighting in the Civil War.
I think that involved down at the gallery when they were having shows that were involved here. So all of the articles that were in the paper, I saved that he wrote. And
This is his weekly column that he wrote.
he would come down to what he knew about the shows that were in Meriden.
Right.
And the fact that I belonged to the Connecticut Pastel Society and a few others. And through Connecticut, almost every town had an art group, and they would have a show at least once a year. Now,
And he would be there, right?
yeah, and so if there was something coming up that I didn't think he would know about, we would call him and let him know about it so he could cover it.
Right.
So this was one of his articles, and you could see I ended up using this particular painting.
Well, he
and,
sounds like a lovely guy, not just being so embedded in the art community, teaching art education, an artist of himself, but almost evangelical in promoting other artists via his column. So he obviously had that aspect to him in terms of communicating and the enthusiasm. We were interviewing Hector Cardona the other day, and one of the things that I remember from his Meriden Hall of Fame induction plaque of 2018, it says, everybody is always struck by his contagious pride in Meriden. And it sounds like Mr. Potter had a contagious affection and enthusiasm about art, and he did whatever he could to share that. Would that be true?
Yes, and it was a weekly column, and it was always, you always look forward to reading it because it had, me or you or the kids from school in it.
What a guy.
And yeah, and he is actually, once I finished art school, he called me down to his office and he said, Chris, we have an art opening. Are you interested? I go, yeah, I'd be interested. And he goes, are you good? And I said, I'm pretty good. And he said, well, will you do a good job? And I said, I'll do the best I can. And then he said, okay, you're hired.
I'm Ray Gawlak. I've lived in Meriden just about all my life. And was in the last class at Meriden High School. And I began my photography career actually in college at Southern Connecticut. And I got to know Tom very briefly because he wrote a really complimentary article using photographs from my exhibit. And I talked with him briefly, and he was really a very kind, very generous man. And I would say he helped me get my career started in Meriden. because at that time, photography, I would have not ever gotten into Gallery 53, because there was kind of a prejudice against photography. It wasn't considered art.
It wasn't considered art yet, more
And I think
technically.
he considered it.
But wouldn't Thomas Potter be proud if he's looking down to see how vibrant the art community is in Meriden? You have a place and you can operationalize all these interests and all this art. I was able, Ellie, you don't remember me, but I was able to snag one of your pastels a couple of years ago, that it was actually hanging at 53, Gallery 53, with Chris's help.
I think
really.
Tom, said, we used to let him know where any of the shows that we were in, so that he would come and be there for the opening, and then he would do an article on him. So he covered for other towns as well.
Yeah.
Now, I did ones for Hamden and for Clinton and different places like that, but they would have an annual show every year, and he would come down and cover it and put it in the American paper, so that there was, so more people would go down and see the show.
So now would you then share with us the story of Joseph Pierce? I know you've produced this timeline, very granular and detailed, which we will certainly use at the exhibit, but will you sort of share the particulars of Joseph Pierce's story for us?
Well, I'll be happy to. The more I reflect on his story, the more I think that God actually had his hand on Joseph's life. When you consider the fact that at the age of 10, he was sold to a sea captain for $6 silver. Now, he could have been sold to any sea captain. He would have probably been a cabin boy that lived on sea the most of his life. But the sea captain was Amos Peck, from a very prominent family in Berlin, Connecticut. The Pecks were abolitionists, didn't believe in slavery. So what he did was he brought Joseph back to the United States to grow up with the family. While they were on ship, the sailors probably didn't know how to pronounce his Chinese name or didn't know what it was, so they started calling him Joe. And I think that's somewhat common. I remember my dad had his laundry in Bridgeport. The man next door couldn't pronounce his name, so he started calling him Joe. So I guess everyone's Joe if you don't know his name. And then when the ship landed in the United States, Franklin Pierce was president of the United States. So that's how he got his surname, Joseph Pierce. So, Amos brought him back to Berlin, Connecticut to grow up with his brothers and sisters. He learned to read and write. He went to church at the Kensington Methodist Church, went to school at the Stockingbrook School, and basically was well accepted by the community, being part of the Pierce Peck family, and also the fact that there weren't many Chinese at the East Coast at the time. So, again, that was, to me, he could have, again, been a servant his whole life and wound up at sea, but no, God had his hand and brought him to the United States. And then after the disastrous Battle of Bull Run, when President Lincoln issued a call for 300,000 volunteers until the end of the war, Joseph, along with 121 members of the Berlin community, enlisted to fight for the cause of Union. And Joseph became a member of the 14th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry, which became part of the Army of the Potomac, the 2nd Army Corps. And they fought from Antietam through Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, all the way until the end of the war to Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. The 14th Connecticut fought more battles and skirmishes than any of the other 29 regiments in Connecticut. They captured more men, more prisoners. 3 members won the Medal of Honor, and only 215 of the 1,015 men that left Connecticut returned to Connecticut, and Joseph Pierce was one of them. So God again had his hand on his life to go through a bloody war like that where there were over 600,000 casualties. He came back unharmed and all. And when he came back, he wanted to go back to his pre-war profession as a farmer. But lo and behold, again, God had other plans for him. One of Amos Peck's sisters. Mary Elizabeth married Dennis Wilcox. Dennis Wilcox was the brother of Horace Wilcox. And because of that connection, Joseph moved to Meriden to apprentice as a silver engraver. So for the rest of his life, he worked for the Meriden Britannica Company as a silver engraver, a profession. He was able to marry a Martha Morgan from Portland, Connecticut. And I thought that was really interesting. She's an American, but back then, Chinese, marriages were arranged. And I thought, well, I'm hoping that it was really a love match with the two of them. So the two of them got married November 13th in 1876. They had 4 children, 2 daughters, Etna, who died young, Lula, who died at the age of 16, but his 2 sons grew to adulthood. And it was interesting, again, that Joseph got his last name through the president's name, Pierce. He named his older son Franklin Pierce, and then he named his second son Benjamin Pierce, because President Pierce had a son named Benjamin. So those were the 2 surviving members of the family. They went to the Trinity Episcopal Methodist Church. The children went to the King's School. It was just around the corner. The family settled on Meridian Street. The house is still there. It was across from the old location of the hospital. And I think that people could almost consider that they lived a middle-class life. The American dream, before that even became known as a term and all. But unfortunately, the United States at that point passed an act called the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which made it difficult for Chinese to become citizens. And if you had family in China, you couldn't bring them over to live. Basically, they wanted the Chinese to leave America, and if they couldn't bring their family members, and if you stayed here, they were hoping that the Chinese population would die out. And the reason for the act was that, it was a political act. They were saying that Chinese were taking jobs away from Americans. And I think for our history, you can always have blank taking away jobs from Americans, just fill that in. But it made it difficult for Chinese really to be considered as citizens or even accepted in this country. And I think it had to be hard on Joseph because he was such an accepted member. And at the beginning, I don't think that the act really had much of an effect on the family. But as part of the act, there was something called the Garrity Act. And the Chinese in America who were here legally had to actually register with the government to get something that was almost akin to an internal passport. If someone stopped you, you had to show them that you actually belonged. And the officials in Meriden suggested to Joseph that he get one, even though he became a naturalized citizen because of his participation in the Civil War. He actually became a naturalized citizen in 1866. So he did register, and then in the 1880 census, he basically said that he was Chinese and came from China. But then 10 years later, he said that he was Japanese. And he wound up cutting off his queue. The queue is the long braid that the Chinese wore, and that was really, something that would remind them of their heritage and would allow them to go back to China, but he wound up cutting that off. And from that point on, the family really did not speak much of the fact that they were from China. In fact, when I was able to get in contact with the great-granddaughters of Joseph and Martha, they really had no idea that he was even Chinese because the grandson of Joseph, basically did not want to talk about the background. So that was probably the one thing that I think that really weighed on him at that point. Joseph died in 1916 on January the 3rd. And his obituary didn't mention anything about his Civil War involvement. but it only said that he died well-known and well-liked. And I can't help to think that if, for our obituaries, that would be one thing that I think everyone would be happy to be known as and all. So that's the story, you know, when Joseph died. Basically, I don't think anyone really thought about, you know, the role that he played in the Civil War. But in the intervening years, something amazing has happened. In 1993, in the original Visitor Center at Gettysburg, there's an exhibit that included his picture. It was called Uncommon Soldiers at Gettysburg. And his picture was on the wall at that point. And then it became even better known through all the magazines, Civil War magazines, North and South, Civil War, Times Illustrated, that had stories about Joseph Pierce. Even at the 150th anniversary, the South China Morning Record in Hong Kong had a story of Joseph Pierce to really broaden his name to people in the world, besides, you know, in the Civil War community. And in that time, there were actually 4 books that were written about Joseph, whether, you know, he was a participant or written about him. The first one was my book, An American Journey, My Father, Lincoln, Joseph Pierce, and Me. The second was the National Park Service had a booklet. They wrote that during the time of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, because they wanted to tell people that that war wasn't just whites between whites. It was really a war that many different people, immigrants, fought because they thought that there was a reason to fight, maybe to fight for a place in a new society and all. And that book is Asians and Pacific Islanders and the Civil War. And then there was a book for young adults called Freedom for Me, a Chinese Yankee, based on Joseph Pierce's story. And later on this month in August, a children's book is coming out, and it's called Worthy, the Brave and Capable Life of Joseph Pierce. So he's been honored, and I'm just grateful that the Meriden Historical Society is honoring him on the Hall of Fame. In fact, we had a dedication at his grave site, and this was in the July 30th, 2006 Meriden Record Journal. And this was a quote by the director of Michael Cole at the Walnut Grove Cemetery. And he's quoted as saying, "He's a big part of the history of Meriden and should be recognized. There aren't many other dedications. Pierce is singled out for the uniqueness of his whole story." So I'm grateful for the Historical Society to sort of bring this whole story together to honor Joseph the way they are.
Love it. Sort of following up on that, now we've got, there, I know they did the ceremony and they gave him an official
A GAR.
GAR, like a plaque, but the original tombstone, limestone tombstone, did show him that he was a corporal, right?
Yes, it did. Yes, it
So,
did.
so that was known, but maybe just not.
It wasn't known the way it is,
it
because
should now.
if you go, you know, unfortunately, people's histories get lost to the memory
Right.
of history.
Right.
You can only read what's on there. And I think the fact too is that Joseph Pierce, most people wouldn't have even thought he was Chinese
Because of the last name,
because of the
right?
last name. And I think that's one of the drawbacks of trying to find out about which Chinese fought in the Civil War, because the names are different.
It was misleading.
They're